The entire life of Leonardo da Vinci. This is written in a calm, storytelling style designed to help someone drift into sleep while still absorbing the narrative. The beginning. A child of Vinci, close your eyes and imagine a gentle Tuscan landscape, soft rolling hills bathed in golden light where olive groves stretch across the horizon and vineyards curl lazily along the slopes. It is here, in the small village of Vinci, just outside the bustling city of Florence, that one of the most remarkable minds in human history was born. The year is 1452 and Europe is in the heart of the Renaissance, a time when art, science and philosophy are beginning to intertwine in extraordinary ways. On the 15th day of April, a child takes his first breath in a stone farmhouse near the town of Vinci. That child's name is Leonardo, destined to become Leonardo da Vinci, a man whose ideas and creations would echo across the centuries. Birth and family. Leonardo was the son of Ser Piero da Vinci, a respected notary, and a peasant woman named Caterina. He was born out of wedlock, which in that time could have limited his path in society. But rather than holding him back, this unusual beginning gave Leonardo a unique perspective on life. He belonged neither to the rigid world of nobility nor entirely to the humbler class of peasants. Instead, he floated between both realms, free to observe, free to question, and free to imagine. Ser Piero soon married another woman, while Caterina also went on to wed someone else. Leonardo was raised in his father's household, where he was treated with affection, though never quite as a legitimate heir. This curious position made him both part of a family and yet apart from it, something that would echo through his life, for Leonardo always seemed to stand slightly outside the world, watching, studying, and wondering. A curious child. From his earliest years, Leonardo displayed a remarkable curiosity. He wandered the fields and forests of Tuscany, his eyes never still, always noticing the flutter of birds, the ripple of water, the way light fell through the leaves. He filled his young mind with questions. Why do birds fly? How do rivers carve the land? What makes the sky blue? There is a story told of Leonardo as a boy capturing a small lizard and playfully attaching wings to its back, fascinated by the thought of turning a simple creature into something fantastical. While perhaps a simple childhood prank, it hints at the lifelong merging of art, imagination and science that would define him. Unlike many children of his time, Leonardo did not receive a full classical education. He learned to read and write in Italian, though his Latin, the language of scholars, was always somewhat clumsy. Yet this lack of traditional schooling only reinforced his independence. Instead of being confined by rigid lessons, he followed the school of nature itself, taking the world as his teacher. The world around him. To understand Leonardo's beginnings, one must imagine the atmosphere of 15th century Tuscany. Florence, not far from Vinci, was a city alive with ideas. Great patrons like the Medici family supported artists, thinkers, and inventors. The streets buzzed with merchants, philosophers debated in the piazzas, and workshops hummed with activity. Though Leonardo was still just a child, this was the air he breathed, the air of discovery, of ambition, of human creativity unbound. He absorbed it silently, as though preparing himself for the moment when he, too, would step onto the stage of the Renaissance. A love of nature. As Leonardo grew, his fascination with the natural world deepened. He was not content merely to see, he wanted to understand. The curve of a shell, the pattern of ripples in a stream, the way clouds drifted across the sky, all seemed to him like secrets waiting to be unlocked. He began sketching what he saw. At first, his drawings were the simple scrawls of a boy, but even then they revealed an unusual precision. He had a gift for capturing not only the shape of a thing, but also its spirit. A flower was not just petals and stem, it was life unfolding, delicate and mysterious. This habit of drawing would never leave him. Later in life, his notebooks would overflow with sketches of plants, animals, machines, and human anatomy. But the seed of that lifelong practice was planted here in his childhood walks through the countryside of Vinci. The quiet foundations. Leonardo's childhood was not marked by wealth or privilege, but by freedom. He was not bound by the expectations of a noble family, nor was he pressed into the hard labor of peasants. Instead, he roamed between these worlds, belonging to both and yet to neither. This freedom gave him time to watch, to sketch, to dream. He was a child of observation, and in that observation lay the first foundations of genius. By the time he reached his teenage years, those around him could already see his unusual talent. His father, Ser Piero, recognized that Leonardo's gift for drawing was too strong to ignore. And so, in the years to come, he would send his son to Florence, into the bustling world of workshops and apprenticeships. But for now, Leonardo remained in Vinci, a boy with wide eyes and restless hands, sketching what he saw, dreaming of worlds beyond the hills of Tuscany. A glimpse of destiny. It is said that every great journey begins with a single step. For Leonardo da Vinci, that first step was not the grand halls of Florence, nor the great courts of Milan, but the quiet meadows and streams of his childhood home. In the hum of bees, in the sweep of wings above the fields, in the play of sunlight on water, he began to sense that life itself was a puzzle, one that could be studied, sketched, and perhaps understood. This was the beginning of a life that would stretch across art and science, invention and philosophy. A life that would leave behind paintings like the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, and notebooks filled with designs centuries ahead of their time. But here, at the start, Leonardo was simply a child of Vinci, curious, observant, and ready to step into a world that would one day call him a genius. The path to Florence, apprenticeship and awakening. Picture Leonardo now as a boy on the edge of adolescence, standing at the threshold of a new life. His childhood days of wandering the Tuscan hills are giving way to a future shaped by art, craft, and the bustling pulse of Florence, the beating heart of the Renaissance. His father, Ser Piero, has begun to recognize the extraordinary gift hidden in the boy's restless sketches. Leonardo's drawings, once idle diversions of a curious child, have blossomed into works that whisper of genius. And so the father makes a decision that will alter the course of history. Leonardo will be sent to the city to study under a master. Florence in the Renaissance. Florence at this time was a city unlike any other. It was alive with the hum of merchants, the music of street performers, the chatter of philosophers, and the steady rhythm of hammer on chisel in the workshops of sculptors. The air itself seemed charged with possibility. The Medici family, wealthy bankers and perhaps the greatest patrons of the arts in history, had transformed Florence into a center of innovation. Here, painters were rethinking the very way perspective and depth could be shown on canvas. Sculptors carved marble with lifelike precision. Architects imagined domes that kissed the sky. Florence was not only a city, it was a living experiment in human creativity. For a young Leonardo, this was both overwhelming and intoxicating. His father took him by the hand and led him through its crowded streets, past workshops filled with apprentices grinding pigments, carving wood, casting bronze. Somewhere within these walls, Leonardo's journey would begin. The workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, Ser Piero chose well. Leonardo was placed in the workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the leading artists of the day. Verrocchio was not only a painter but also a sculptor, a goldsmith, and an engineer. His studio was a place where art met craft, where apprentices learned not only to paint, but to shape clay, work metal, and imagine new creations. For Leonardo, this was a treasure chest. Here, he could touch every discipline that fascinated him. He watched as Verrocchio sculpted gleaming bronze statues, as apprentices mixed bright pigments from minerals and plants, as sketches on parchment blossomed into grand altarpieces. Every task, from sweeping floors to preparing brushes, became a lesson. Leonardo was not like other apprentices. His eyes were always searching, his mind always racing. He did not merely copy his master's strokes, he studied the muscles beneath the skin, the folds of drapery as they caught the light, the way shadows curved around objects. Even in these early days, he sought to uncover the laws that governed what he saw. The baptism of Christ. It was during this time that Leonardo's talent first astonished those around him. Verrocchio had been commissioned to paint a large panel, the baptism of Christ. In it, John the Baptist pours water over the head of Christ as angels kneel nearby. As was common in workshops, apprentices assisted the master by painting less important details. Verrocchio assigned Leonardo to paint one of the angels. The young apprentice set to work with quiet determination, his brush gliding with sensitivity and precision. When the painting was unveiled, something remarkable had happened. Leonardo's angel, delicate and radiant, outshone the rest of the work. Its face seemed alive, its hair shimmered with light, and its wings carried a softness that seemed almost divine. According to legend, Verrocchio, humbled by the brilliance of his pupil, declared that he would never paint again. Whether or not this story is entirely true, what cannot be denied is that the angel marked Leonardo's arrival. He was no longer just an apprentice, he was an artist in his own right. Leonardo the polymath in training. Life in Verrocchio's workshop offered Leonardo more than painting alone. He studied sculpture, learning how to mold clay and carve marble. He experimented with metals, gaining skills that would later serve him in engineering. He sketched endlessly, filling pages with studies of horses, plants, and faces. But his curiosity stretched beyond the boundaries of art. He dissected animals to study their anatomy, carefully recording the structure of muscles and bones. He observed the flow of water in fountains and streams, sketching its swirling currents. He designed simple machines, fascinated by the gears and pulleys that turned human strength into power. Leonardo was becoming not just a painter, but a thinker. He began to view the world as a grand puzzle, one in which art, science, and invention were threads of the same tapestry. A quiet and observant soul. Despite his brilliance, Leonardo was not a loud or boastful figure in these years. He was known for his quiet nature, for watching more than speaking, for observing where others hurried past. His notebooks from this period, though fewer than in later years, reveal an imagination that never rested. He also carried with him a gentle spirit. He loved animals deeply, often buying birds in the marketplace only to set them free. He became a vegetarian, unusual for his time, because he could not bear the thought of harming living creatures. Even as he trained in arts that celebrated human power and ambition, Leonardo's heart remained tied to compassion. The dawn of independence. By the time Leonardo reached his early 20s, his reputation was growing. Patrons began to notice the young artist with the thoughtful gaze and the extraordinary hand. Though still under Verrocchio's wing, he was ready to step into the world on his own. Florence, with its endless energy, awaited him. Here he would take commissions, experiment with techniques, and begin works that, though some would remain unfinished, would reveal the restless perfectionism of his soul. But even as he prepared to spread his wings, Leonardo remained a student of light and shadow, of body and spirit, of machines and nature. The boy who once roamed the fields of Vinci had now entered the workshop of the Renaissance itself, and the world was only beginning to glimpse the genius he would become. First commissions. The budding master. Leonardo now stands as a young man in Florence, the city of art and ambition. He has spent years under the guidance of Andrea del Verrocchio, absorbing everything the workshop had to offer. He has learned to mix pigments, to sketch with unerring accuracy, to sculpt, and to design. He has seen his angel in the baptism of Christ shine brighter than the work of his own master. The time has come for him to begin a life of his own. Florence is ready. The city hums with opportunity, and artists are in demand to paint altarpieces, portraits, and frescoes. Patrons, merchants, guilds, and noble families are eager to decorate chapels and halls with scenes of devotion and grandeur. Into this bustling world steps Leonardo with quiet confidence, carrying brushes, ideas, and a boundless imagination. The first commissions. Leonardo's earliest independent works were often modest by later standards, but even here his genius began to show. He was commissioned to create small devotional paintings, works that would sit in homes or chapels and inspire quiet prayer. One of his first known pieces is the Annunciation, painted around 1472. It shows the angel Gabriel kneeling before the Virgin Mary, who is seated with a book in her hands. The composition may seem traditional, but Leonardo's touch is unmistakable. The angel's wings shimmer with subtle detail, and the background stretches into a distant landscape, painted with a delicate sense of atmospheric perspective. The scene feels alive, as though the air itself is filled with the hush of divine presence. There is a tenderness in Mary's expression, a calmness in the folds of her robe, a lifelike stillness in the flowers that decorate the scene. Already Leonardo was bringing his deep observation of nature into his sacred art. Where other painters relied on formula, he relied on the world itself. The Adoration of the Magi. In 1481, Leonardo received a more ambitious commission from the monks of San Donato a Scopeto, a large panel painting of the Adoration of the Magi. This would depict the three wise men kneeling before the infant Christ, surrounded by a host of figures. Leonardo threw himself into the work, producing elaborate sketches and a grand unfinished painting. The composition is complex and dynamic, filled with twisting bodies, expressive faces, horses rearing in the background, and ruins hinting at the passage of old worlds into new. What is most striking is the intensity of emotion. The figures are not simply posed. They are alive with wonder, curiosity, and devotion. Some reach toward the child, others whisper among themselves, and still others gaze in awe. Leonardo had transformed a traditional biblical subject into a human drama of spirit and expression. Yet, as with many of his works, Leonardo did not finish it. The painting remains incomplete, a hauntingly beautiful sketch of what could have been. But even in its unfinished state, it reveals the restless perfectionism of his nature. He was always reaching, always exploring, never content to stop at the surface. Portraits and the human face. In these years, Leonardo also began to explore portraiture, a genre that fascinated him deeply. He understood that the human face was not just a likeness, but a window into the soul. One early portrait attributed to him is Ginevra de' Benci, painted around 1474. Ginevra was a young noblewoman of Florence, and Leonardo captured her with striking realism. Her pale face, framed by soft curls, gazes outward with a distant, thoughtful expression. Behind her stretches a juniper bush, ginepro in Italian, a symbolic reference to her name. The portrait is remarkable for its psychological depth. Unlike the stiff, formal portraits of the time, Leonardo's Ginevra seems to breathe. She is not an icon, but a person, caught in a moment of quiet reflection. It is as though Leonardo had peered into her inner world and transferred it, brushstroke by brushstroke, onto the wooden panel. The study of light and shadow. During these first years of independence, Leonardo continued to refine his revolutionary technique of sfumato, the subtle blending of tones that softens outlines and creates a smoky, atmospheric effect. Rather than harsh lines, his figures emerged gently from the shadows as if bathed in natural light. This was more than a technical innovation, it was a philosophy of seeing. To Leonardo, the world was not divided into sharp edges but composed of gradual transitions. Light melted into darkness, form into shadow, earth into sky. His paintings reflected this understanding, drawing the viewer into a vision of reality that was at once precise and poetic. Unfinished dreams. One of the recurring themes of Leonardo's life was his habit of leaving works unfinished. Some saw this as a flaw, a lack of discipline. But in truth, it was a reflection of his endless curiosity. For Leonardo, a painting was never simply a painting, it was an investigation, a window into anatomy, light, movement, and spirit. Once he had explored what he needed, his restless mind would often move on to the next mystery. Thus, even in his early years, he left behind incomplete works, projects abandoned not out of failure, but out of an insatiable desire to keep learning. To Leonardo, the journey was often more important than the destination, the reputation of a young master. By his mid-20s, Leonardo was no longer simply Verrocchio's apprentice. He had become a painter of repute, known in Florence for his extraordinary skill. Patrons sought him, though they also sometimes grew frustrated with his slowness and perfectionism. He had shown that he could capture both divine mystery and human emotion, that he could paint portraits with startling intimacy and religious scenes with grandeur. Yet despite his growing fame, Leonardo was still searching for something more. Florence, vibrant though it was, sometimes felt confining. His imagination stretched beyond the walls of the city toward visions of engineering, architecture, and new horizons. Soon the winds of fortune would carry him to Milan, to the court of a powerful duke, where his genius would find new forms of expression. The young genius takes flight. As this chapter of his life closes, picture Leonardo walking through the streets of Florence, sketchbook in hand, eyes lifted to the world around him. He has painted angels and Madonnas, designed altarpieces and portraits, studied light, shadow, and form. He has tasted fame, but he longs for more. His steps echo on the stones, mingling with the sounds of the city. Merchants calling, bells ringing, workshops clattering with tools. Florence has given him a foundation, but beyond these walls lies Milan, and with it, new opportunities that will push him further into the realm of invention, art, and history. A new horizon, Leonardo in Milan. By the late 1470s, Leonardo had grown into a recognized artist in Florence. He had painted angels, Madonnas, and portraits that astonished patrons with their depth and beauty. Yet Florence, for all its brilliance, could not contain the full expanse of his ambition. He longed for larger canvases, greater projects, and a place where his imagination for machines and architecture could stand alongside his art. That opportunity would come not in Florence, but in Milan, under the rule of a powerful duke. The road to Milan. Milan in the late 15th century was a city of might and elegance. Unlike Florence, which thrived on commerce and republican ideals, Milan was a courtly city ruled by dukes and military strength. Its leader, Ludovico Sforza, known as Ludovico il Moro, was ambitious. He wanted Milan to rival Florence and Venice in culture, prestige, and grandeur. To achieve this, he needed not only warriors and politicians, but artists and engineers. Leonardo saw in Milan a stage large enough for his dreams. Around 1482, he wrote a famous letter to Ludovico Sforza offering his services. This was no ordinary application. In it, Leonardo listed not his paintings, but his abilities as a military engineer. He described machines for attacking cities, designs for bridges, canals, and fortifications. Only at the end did he modestly mention that he could also paint. This letter reveals much about Leonardo's mind. He was not content to be only an artist. He wished to be an inventor, an architect, a designer of cities and engines. Milan, with its hunger for innovation, seemed the perfect place. The court of Ludovico Sforza. When Leonardo arrived in Milan, he entered a world of power and intrigue. The Sforza court glittered with wealth, filled with feasts, tournaments, and displays of magnificence. Ludovico il Moro wanted art that would glorify his reign, music that would charm his guests, and machines that would strengthen his armies. For Leonardo, it was both opportunity and challenge. He became a court artist, engineer, and designer, all in one. He created plans for military machines, giant crossbows, armored vehicles, improved cannons. He sketched designs for canals and water systems, helping Milan manage its rivers. He staged theatrical spectacles, designing costumes and elaborate machines to astonish audiences. And of course, he painted. The Lady with an Ermine, one of his earliest masterpieces in Milan, was the portrait of Cecilia Gallerani, a young woman of grace and intelligence who was also the Duke's mistress. Leonardo painted her with an ermine cradled in her arms, a symbol of purity and perhaps also a play on Ludovico's title, The White Ermine. The portrait is luminous. Cecilia turns slightly as though caught mid-motion, her eyes bright with thought. The ermine rests calmly, its fur painted with delicate strokes. Unlike stiff portraits of the era, Cecilia feels alive, breathing, moving, thinking. Leonardo had again pierced the veil of the human soul. The monument to Francesco Sforza. Leonardo's greatest project in Milan, though ultimately unrealized, was the Sforza horse, an enormous equestrian monument to honor Ludovico's father, Francesco Sforza. It was to be the largest bronze horse ever cast, towering over courtyards, a symbol of Milan's might. Leonardo devoted years to this project. He studied the anatomy of horses obsessively, filling pages with sketches of their muscles, bones, and movements. He designed ingenious methods for casting the massive statue in bronze. In 1493, a full-sized clay model of the horse was unveiled, astonishing all who saw it. But the bronze intended for the casting was diverted to build cannons for war. When French troops later invaded, they destroyed the clay model with arrows. The monument was never completed. Though it ended in disappointment, the project shows the breadth of Leonardo's vision. He was not merely a painter of panels and portraits. He imagined works that would alter the very landscape of cities. The Last Supper. It was also in Milan that Leonardo created one of the most famous paintings in the world, The Last Supper. Commissioned for the refectory of the convent of Santa Maria delle Grazie, it depicts the moment when Christ announces to his disciples that one of them will betray him. Leonardo approached the work not as a simple religious scene, but as a drama of human emotion. Each disciple reacts differently: shock, anger, denial, sorrow, creating a symphony of gestures and expressions. Christ sits calm at the center, a still point in the storm of human feeling. Technically, Leonardo experimented with a new method, painting on the wall with oils and tempera rather than traditional fresco. This allowed him to achieve subtler effects of light and texture, but it also made the painting fragile. Within decades, it began to deteriorate. Even so, the power of the Last Supper endures. Despite its faded state, it remains one of the most moving images in Western art, a testament to Leonardo's genius in capturing both the divine and the human. Leonardo the Court Entertainer. Life at the Sforza court was not all solemn commissions. Leonardo also designed pageants, theatrical productions, and festive entertainments. He created mechanical devices that lowered angels from the ceiling, elaborate stage sets that changed before the audience's eyes, costumes of fantastic invention. These spectacles delighted the court, but for Leonardo they were more than amusement. They were laboratories of invention, places where art, engineering, and imagination met. Every stage machine, every costume design was another exploration into the union of mechanics and beauty. A man of many pursuits. By the mid-1490s, Leonardo had established himself in Milan as more than an artist. He was a painter of masterpieces, a designer of monuments, an engineer, and an entertainer. His notebooks from this time overflow with sketches, plans for flying machines, studies of water flow, designs for weapons, explorations of anatomy. He was becoming the very embodiment of the Renaissance ideal, a man who sought to master all knowledge, who saw no boundary between art and science, painting and engineering, imagination and reality. The seeds of restlessness. And yet, even in the glory of Milan, Leonardo's restlessness remained. Many of his projects remained unfinished, abandoned not for lack of skill, but because his mind always leapt to the next discovery. The Sforza court gave him a stage grand enough for his visions, but it also tied him to the whims of politics and war. Soon, those winds of war would sweep Milan into turmoil, and Leonardo's path would once again shift. For now, though, imagine him standing in the refectory of Santa Maria delle Grazie, gazing at the Last Supper as the final touches dry. The disciples lean toward Christ, caught in a moment of eternal tension. Leonardo steps back, silent, thoughtful, knowing he has created something that will outlive the walls on which it was painted. The inventor's mind, machines, engineering, and wonder. As the years passed in Milan, Leonardo's fame as a painter grew. Yet for Leonardo, painting was only one voice in the great chorus of his imagination. He did not see a boundary between art and science, between brush and compass, between beauty and mechanism. To him, the world was a vast machine, and to understand it was to uncover the hidden harmony of creation. In his notebooks, which he carried with him like faithful companions, Leonardo sketched endlessly, filling page after page with designs, calculations, and studies. Birds in flight, the swirl of water, the anatomy of the horse, gears and pulleys, bridges and canals, everything was worthy of his pen. These notebooks, scattered across libraries today, are among the most remarkable treasures of history. They reveal a mind not satisfied with what was, but forever dreaming of what could be. Flying like the birds, perhaps nothing fascinated Leonardo more than the mystery of flight. He would stand in fields outside Milan, watching birds rise into the air with powerful beats of their wings, or glide effortlessly on invisible currents. He believed that if nature could lift a bird, then man too might someday soar. His notebooks show intricate designs for flying machines. Some resemble great mechanical wings meant to be strapped to the arms of a daring pilot. Others are more like gliders, using the principles of air to lift and sustain. He even imagined a helicopter-like device, a vertical screw that, when spun fast enough, might rise into the air. Though none of these machines took flight in his lifetime, they were astonishingly ahead of their age. Centuries later, when airplanes filled the sky, many would look back to Leonardo's sketches as the first dreams of human flight. The power of water. Leonardo also studied water with endless fascination. To him, water was the blood of the earth, flowing through rivers and canals as veins through a body. He drew whirlpools, currents, waterfalls, and ripples with uncanny precision. He designed machines to harness water, mills to grind grain, pumps to raise water from rivers, and canals to transport goods. He worked on projects to improve Milan's waterways, making them more efficient for trade. In his notes, he wrote of water's strength and danger, its ability to carve valleys and wear down stone. He saw it as both life-giver and destroyer, a force that shaped the world. Machines of war. Living in an age of constant conflict, Leonardo also turned his mind to the grim necessities of war. In his famous letter to Ludovico Sforza, he had promised weapons unlike any the world had seen. He sketched designs for giant crossbows, so massive they stretched the imagination. He imagined armored vehicles, machines bristling with cannons, rolling forward like metallic beasts. He drew improved designs for catapults, cannons, and fortifications. Yet despite these designs, Leonardo's spirit was not warlike. He abhorred violence, and many believe he offered these machines more to secure patronage than to see them built. His love for life and nature always outweighed his interest in destruction. Still, his ideas reveal the breadth of his engineering genius, able to envision tools of power that would not appear again until centuries later. Bridges and cities. Leonardo's genius extended to architecture and urban planning. He designed elegant bridges, some of them daringly ambitious. One proposal was for a single-span bridge across the Golden Horn in Constantinople, far longer than anything attempted in his time. Though it was never built, engineers centuries later confirmed that his design would have worked. He also imagined ideal cities with wide streets to avoid congestion, canals to carry waste away, and separate levels for traffic and pedestrians. At a time when cities often suffered from disease and disorder, Leonardo was dreaming of a cleaner, healthier future. The anatomy of life. Alongside machines and buildings, Leonardo devoted himself to the study of the human body. He dissected animals first, then later human corpses, with the permission of hospitals. He filled notebooks with detailed drawings of bones, muscles, organs, and veins. These studies were not merely scientific, they informed his art, giving his figures lifelike accuracy and grace. In his drawings, one can see the delicate curve of a spine, the tension of a tendon, the rhythm of muscles as they move beneath the skin. His anatomical studies also reflected his reverence for life. He marveled at the complexity of the human form, describing the body as a masterpiece of design, created with a precision beyond any machine. The notebook world. If one could open Leonardo's notebooks from this period, it would be like stepping into a kaleidoscope of thought. On a single page, one might see a sketch of a flying machine, a diagram of water currents, a drawing of a human skull, and a whimsical cartoon of a grotesque face. He wrote in his distinctive mirror script, right to left, perhaps to keep his ideas private, or simply because it suited his left-handed hand. He scribbled notes in Italian, sometimes disjointed, sometimes profound. These notebooks were not written for publication, they were his companions, his laboratory of thought. In their pages, the Renaissance world expands into dreams of the future. A restless spirit. Despite all this brilliance, Leonardo's restlessness persisted. He began many projects, but finished few. His patrons, eager for tangible results, sometimes grew impatient, but Leonardo could not confine himself to a single task when the universe itself beckoned with infinite mysteries. To him, a painting was not just a painting, but a study of light, of anatomy, of emotion. A machine was not just a machine, but a step toward unlocking nature's secrets. Every endeavor was a gateway to something larger. The genius in motion. As the 15th century drew toward its end, Leonardo stood in Milan as a man of dazzling reputation. He had painted The Last Supper, designed marvels of engineering, dreamed of flight, and studied the human form with unmatched devotion. And yet, his journey was far from over. The winds of war were rising again in Italy. The French would march into Milan, scattering the Sforza court, and Leonardo would be forced to seek new paths once more. But here, in these Milanese years, we see Leonardo at his most expansive, an artist, an engineer, a scientist, a dreamer. A man who saw no boundary between art and knowledge, who believed the world itself was an open book, waiting to be read with curious eyes. The fall of Milan, return to Florence, and rivalry. The year was 1499, and the winds of war swept across northern Italy. French armies marched into Milan, and the proud court of Ludovico Sforza collapsed in the chaos. For nearly 2 decades, Leonardo had called Milan his home. Here he had painted The Last Supper, designed grand machines, and dreamed of cities and monuments. But now, all of it slipped away like dust carried on the wind. Leonardo packed his notebooks, his sketches, his unfinished projects, and left the city. He wandered first to Mantua, then Venice, offering his services as a military engineer, sketching new fortifications, studying waterways. Yet always his heart was restless. He had lost not only his patron, but also his place of belonging. Eventually, his steps turned back toward the city of his youth. Florence. Florence, once more. By the early 1500s, Florence had changed. The city was alive with new energy, bursting with creativity and rivalry. A younger generation of artists had risen, eager to surpass the masters who had come before. Among them stood a figure whose fame was rising rapidly: Michelangelo Buonarroti. Michelangelo was nearly a generation younger than Leonardo, but his genius burned bright and fierce. He was a sculptor of unmatched intensity, chiseling marble into forms that seemed to breathe with divine power. Florence buzzed with talk of him, just as it still whispered Leonardo's name. Now the 2 greatest minds of the Renaissance walked the same streets, their reputations colliding in rivalry. The Battle of Anghiari. In 1503, Florence's leaders decided to decorate the Great Hall of the Palazzo Vecchio with vast murals celebrating the city's military victories. Leonardo was commissioned to paint one wall with a scene of the Battle of Anghiari, a fierce clash against Milanese forces. Michelangelo, too, was given a commission for the opposite wall to depict the Battle of Cassina. It was a contest unlike any other. 2 of the greatest artists of their time facing one another across the same room. Leonardo approached the project with his usual mix of brilliance and experimentation. He filled his notebooks with furious sketches of horses rearing, soldiers grappling, faces twisted with fury. The central scene he chose was not the sweep of the battlefield, but the violent struggle for a single standard. A banner wrestled between mounted warriors. He began to paint the mural using an experimental technique, applying pigments with heat and wax to achieve richer tones. But the method failed. The colors dripped, the surface cracked. The great mural was abandoned, unfinished once again. Yet even in fragments, the Battle of Anghiari became legendary. Artists flocked to study Leonardo's drawings, marveling at the raw energy of motion and emotion he had captured. Michelangelo, meanwhile, began work on his own fresco, but left for Rome before completing it. Thus, the hall remained unfinished. Its walls are testament to two restless geniuses whose rivalry produced masterpieces that never fully materialized. A meeting of opposites, the rivalry between Leonardo and Michelangelo was more than artistic. It was a clash of personalities. Leonardo, elegant and refined, dressed in fine clothes, spoke with charm, and carried himself with the grace of a courtly gentleman. Michelangelo, by contrast, was rough, blunt, and solitary, devoted entirely to his art and often disdainful of society. They represented two poles of the Renaissance spirit. Leonardo sought harmony, the union of art and science, beauty and knowledge. Michelangelo sought power, the raw force of creation, the struggle of man against stone, against destiny itself. Though they rarely confronted one another directly, Florence could feel the tension between them, as if the city itself was split between two visions of genius. The Mona Lisa begins. During this period in Florence, Leonardo also began work on what would become the most famous painting in the world, the Mona Lisa. Commissioned by a wealthy merchant named Francesco del Giocondo, it was meant to be a portrait of his wife, Lisa Gherardini. Yet Leonardo transformed it into something far beyond a simple likeness. He painted Lisa seated calmly, her hands folded, her body turned slightly, her gaze directed outward with a mysterious smile. Behind her stretched a landscape of winding rivers, distant mountains, and ethereal light. Leonardo's technique of sfumato reached its peak here. The transitions between light and shadow are so smooth that they seem almost invisible, as though the figure emerges from a living atmosphere. The smile is both present and elusive, changing as the viewer moves, suggesting depths of thought and feeling that can never be fully grasped. He carried the painting with him for years, never delivering it to the patron, as if he knew it was not simply a portrait but a meditation on life itself. The scientist in Florence. Even as he painted, Leonardo pursued his scientific studies with renewed vigor. He dissected human bodies in hospitals, sketching muscles, veins, and organs with astonishing accuracy. He studied the mechanics of the heart, the structure of the brain, the flow of blood. He sketched embryos in the womb, marveling at the miracle of life. These studies were not shared widely in his lifetime, for they were private explorations, but they show how deeply Leonardo sought to understand the human condition. To him, the body was not only flesh, but also architecture, a perfect design crafted by nature itself. A restless genius. Despite his achievements, Leonardo's restlessness never eased. He left projects unfinished, pursued ideas that seemed impossible, and moved from city to city in search of new patrons and challenges. Florence gave him commissions and fame, but it also pressed him against rivals and expectations. And so, as he had before, Leonardo began to look beyond the city's walls toward opportunities elsewhere. He would soon enter the service of powerful rulers once again, moving through Italy like a wandering sage of art and invention. Between two giants, as Part 6 draws to a close, imagine Florence in the early 1500s, the Palazzo Vecchio, its hall echoing with the unfinished battles of Leonardo and Michelangelo, the streets alive with gossip of two geniuses, each striving to define the heights of human creativity. On one side stands Michelangelo hammering marble into forms of raw power. On the other stands Leonardo, brush in hand, dissolving light and shadow into a smile that will haunt the world forever. Between them, the Renaissance burns brighter, its light reaching across centuries. The smile, the science, and the spirit of inquiry. Imagine Leonardo in his Florentine workshop, the light of late afternoons spilling across sketches, brushes, and anatomical drawings. On the easel before him sits the portrait that will one day become the most recognized face in the world, the Mona Lisa. He works slowly, with patience, returning to the panel again and again, adding subtle glazes, refining transitions of shadow and light, deepening the mysterious smile. This was not the labor of weeks or months, but of years. Leonardo carried the painting with him through Florence, through travels, even across borders, polishing it like a jewel. To the merchant who had commissioned the portrait, it may have been a frustration, but to Leonardo, the work was something far greater than a commission. It was a meditation on humanity, on mystery, on the delicate balance between reality and illusion, the enigma of the Mona Lisa. Why does her smile captivate us still? Perhaps because Leonardo infused it with the very essence of ambiguity. It is neither fully present nor fully absent, neither joyous nor sorrowful. As one gazes, the smile shifts, at one moment warm, at another elusive. This effect is born of Leonardo's mastery of sfumato, the smoky blending of tones that dissolves edges and softens transitions. But beyond technique lies psychology. Leonardo understood that the human face is never fixed, that it is a theatre of subtle motion. By capturing this fleeting quality, he gave the Mona Lisa not a single expression, but the possibility of many. She is always changing, always alive. The background, too, is filled with meaning, a landscape of winding rivers, cliffs, and distant horizons, painted with the same atmospheric perspective that makes the figure feel part of a living world. It is as if she is both a woman and a symbol of nature itself, calm, eternal, and unknowable. Anatomy and the human mystery. While working on the Mona Lisa, Leonardo also plunged deeply into the study of the human body. He visited hospitals, dissected cadavers, and filled notebooks with exquisite anatomical drawings. He sketched the chambers of the heart, the coils of the intestines, the structure of muscles and tendons. In one series of studies, he drew the human skull with cross-sections that reveal its cavities and the pathways of nerves. In another, he traced the growth of a fetus in the womb, marveling at the miracle of development. These images, drawn with pen and ink centuries before modern medicine, remain astonishingly accurate. For Leonardo, these were not merely scientific exercises. They were an extension of his art. To paint the living, he had to understand life itself. To capture a smile, he had to know the muscles that shaped it. To paint a hand, he had to study the tendons that bent each finger. The scientist of nature. Leonardo's curiosity ranged far beyond the human body. He observed plants, sketching their leaves and stems with careful precision. He studied the growth of trees, noting how branches divided according to mathematical ratios. He drew landscapes with geological attention, showing the layers of rock and the flow of rivers. He was fascinated by water, its currents, its waves, its swirling vortices. He filled pages with sketches of eddies and whirlpools, seeking to understand the laws that governed their motion. He compared the flow of water to the flow of blood in veins, seeing patterns that united nature and the body. In these studies, Leonardo anticipated entire sciences, geology, hydrodynamics, botany, centuries before they were formally established, the inventor at work. At the same time, he continued to dream of inventions. His notebooks show designs for bridges, siege engines, hydraulic pumps, and even mechanical knights. He imagined machines that could lift heavy stones for construction, or vehicles armored against attack. He refined his sketches of flying machines, studying how the wings of birds curved and beat. To many, these designs seemed fanciful, but to Leonardo they were natural extensions of his observations. He was not content merely to see the world. He wanted to remake it, to give humanity new powers through the marriage of nature and mechanics. The Madonna of the Rocks. Amid these pursuits, Leonardo also painted one of his great masterpieces, the Virgin of the Rocks. There are two versions of this work, both showing the Madonna with the infant Christ, the infant John the Baptist, and an angel set in a rocky grotto. The painting is remarkable for its atmosphere. The figures are enveloped in soft light, surrounded by stone, water, and plants. The composition forms a pyramid with the Madonna at the apex, her hand raised in gentle blessing. The children play below while the angel gestures with quiet grace. Here, Leonardo merged his love of nature with his devotion to harmony. The grotto is not mere background, but part of the mystery of the scene, a reminder of the sacred woven into the fabric of the earth itself. Unfinished restlessness. Yet, as always, Leonardo's restlessness showed itself. Many commissions in Florence were left unfinished or delayed. Patrons grew impatient, while Leonardo pursued anatomy, mechanics, or the perfection of a single smile. To some he seemed unreliable, to others he was simply too vast a genius to be confined to deadlines. Florence loved him still, but he was not a man easily tied to one place. The call of new opportunities, of new patrons, grew louder. Soon he would be summoned to Rome, and later to France, where kings themselves would seek his service. A man of many worlds. But here, in Florence, in the first years of the 1500s, we see Leonardo at the heart of his Renaissance spirit. He is at once painter, scientist, and engineer. He creates a portrait that transcends time, studies the human body with unrivaled precision, designs machines that anticipate the future, and paints Madonnas that glow with sacred mystery. He is many men in one, gentle observer, restless inventor, compassionate lover of nature, and ambitious artist. Each part of him feeds the other like rivers flowing into a single sea. The quiet masterpiece. As part 7 closes, picture Leonardo sitting before the Mona Lisa, brush in hand, leaning close to add another delicate glaze to her enigmatic smile. Around him lie notebooks filled with dissections, sketches of machines, and drawings of plants. His mind moves between them effortlessly, as though painting and science were one continuous act of creation. The woman in the painting looks outward, across centuries, her gaze meeting ours. And Leonardo, in his quiet persistence, has given her the gift of eternal life. The later works, shadows, light, and mystery. The years passed, and Leonardo, now in his 50s, carried with him the weight of experience and the glow of undimmed curiosity. His hair had turned silver, his beard long and flowing, yet his eyes still sparkled with the same restless wonder of the boy from Vinci. He had painted the Mona Lisa, explored the mysteries of the human body, and dazzled Florence with his genius, but the journey was far from over. St. John the Baptist. Among the final paintings Leonardo worked on in Italy was the enigmatic St. John the Baptist. Unlike traditional depictions of saints, stern or solemn, Leonardo's John emerges from darkness, lit softly as if by unseen candlelight. His face bears a subtle smile, his finger points upward in gesture, his curls shine with delicate highlights. The painting is filled with ambiguity. John's expression is gentle, almost playful, his body twisting gracefully, his form half hidden in shadow. It is a work that embodies Leonardo's fascination with light and mystery, with the human figure as both physical and spiritual. Some have seen in this painting a reflection of Leonardo himself, mature, contemplative, aware of both light and shadow. Like John pointing upward, Leonardo seemed to suggest that all creation hinted at deeper truths, the Madonna and Child with Saint Anne. Another masterpiece of these years is the Virgin and Child with Saint Anne. In it, Mary sits on the lap of her mother, Saint Anne, while the infant Christ plays with a lamb. The composition weaves the figures together in a spiral of grace, their bodies flowing naturally into one another, their gestures tender and alive. The painting reveals Leonardo's deep understanding of family, of love that passes through generations, of innocence and sacrifice. The lamb, symbol of Christ's destiny, is embraced by the child with the innocence of play, while Mary reaches to restrain him, her gesture both tender and sorrowful. Here again, Leonardo unites the sacred and the human. These are not rigid icons, but a family caught in the flow of life, their emotions subtle, their movements natural. A master of shadows. In these later works, Leonardo's mastery of chiaroscuro, the play of light and shadow, reached its height. He no longer painted with bold outlines or bright contrasts, but with soft gradations, as if figures emerged from a living atmosphere. His paintings feel alive, not because of detail alone, but because of the breath of light within them. This technique was not merely aesthetic. It reflected Leonardo's philosophy, that nature itself is a continuum, that there are no hard boundaries, only gradual transitions. Light fades into shadow, life into death, the known into the unknown. Scientific pursuits continue. Even as he painted, Leonardo never ceased his scientific studies. He returned to anatomy again and again, dissecting human bodies with unmatched precision. His drawings of the heart, lungs, muscles, and nerves remain some of the most detailed ever made before modern science. He studied motion, sketching how people walked, how arms swung, how weight shifted from foot to foot. He analyzed optics, experimenting with how the eye perceives light and perspective. He filled pages with notes on mathematics, geometry, and proportion. His famous Vitruvian Man, a nude figure inscribed in a circle and square, captured his belief that the human body embodied cosmic harmony. To Leonardo, man was a microcosm of the universe, a reflection of divine order. Inventions without end. His notebooks from this period teem with inventions. He imagined machines for lifting heavy stones, new designs for canals, bridges that could be folded and carried, and weapons of terrifying power. He sketched the gears of clocks, the mechanics of windmills, the spiral of screws. One of his boldest ideas was a design for a mechanical knight, capable of standing, sitting, and moving its arms, a vision of robotics centuries before its time. Another was a diving suit made of leather with breathing tubes to allow humans to explore underwater. Most of these machines were never built. Yet in their imagination they reveal Leonardo's unquenchable desire to extend human possibility. He was not content with the world as it was. He dreamed of the world as it might be. The spirit of inquiry. Leonardo's spirit was not driven by wealth or power. He often left patrons waiting, refused to finish works, or wandered from project to project. What drove him was inquiry itself, the joy of understanding, the beauty of discovery. He wrote in his notebooks, "The noblest pleasure is the joy of understanding." For him, knowledge was not a tool, but a form of wonder, a way to come closer to the mysteries of life. Rome beckons. By the second decade of the 1500s, Leonardo's path led him to Rome. The papal court under Pope Leo X was a place of wealth and patronage, where artists, engineers, and thinkers gathered. Here, Michelangelo and Raphael were already creating masterpieces in the Vatican. Leonardo entered Rome with hope, but also with caution. He was older now, and though his reputation was immense, he often felt overshadowed by the younger, more energetic Michelangelo and the beloved Raphael. Still, he brought with him his notebooks, his paintings, his endless curiosity. He continued to study plants, water, and anatomy while offering his services to the papal court. But in Rome, he would find frustration as well as opportunity. The twilight deepens. As Part 8 closes, picture Leonardo in his later Italian years, silver-haired, thoughtful, his fingers stained with ink from sketches and glazes of paint. Around him lie unfinished canvases, notebooks overflowing with visions of machines, drawings of anatomy, and questions about the cosmos. He has painted St. John the Baptist and the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, works filled with shadow and mystery. He has probed the depths of the human body, designed machines of the future, and dreamed of cities yet to come. He is no longer the youthful apprentice of Verrocchio, nor the ambitious court painter of Milan, but a sage of the Renaissance, a man who holds within him the questions of 1,000 lifetimes. And soon his journey will take him to Rome, where destiny will test his patience, even as kings and popes seek his genius. A stage of struggle. The year was 1513. Leonardo, now over 60 years old, made his way to Rome. His beard was long and white, his figure dignified, his fame immense. Yet he carried with him not only glory, but also weariness. He had wandered through Florence and Milan, painted works that astonished the world, and filled countless notebooks with visions of science and invention. Now, in the twilight of his years, he sought new patronage in the Eternal City. Arrival in the Eternal City, Rome, in the early 16th century was a city alive with ambition. The papacy, under Pope Leo X, lavished wealth on the arts, determined to make Rome the new heart of the Renaissance. St. Peter's Basilica was rising under the hands of architects and sculptors. The Vatican's walls were being adorned with frescoes. The city rang with the sound of chisels on marble, brushes on plaster, and hammers shaping stone. Into this vibrant world came Leonardo, accompanied by his faithful pupils, including Francesco Melzi, who would remain by his side until the end. He was welcomed with respect, yet the air carried tension. For in Rome, two younger artists, Michelangelo and Raphael, already held the stage. Raphael's grace, Michelangelo's power. Raphael, only in his 30s, had charmed the papal court. His frescoes in the Vatican stanza glowed with harmony and grace, filled with radiant colors and balanced compositions. Patrons adored him, and his work flowed smoothly, completed with speed and elegance. Michelangelo, fierce and uncompromising, was carving and painting with relentless energy. He had already unveiled his David in Florence and was now at work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, where prophets and sibyls loomed in thunderous grandeur. His reputation grew with every stroke of his chisel and brush. Beside these younger masters, Leonardo seemed different, slower, more experimental, less willing to deliver what patrons demanded. Where Raphael and Michelangelo gave Rome triumphs, Leonardo offered studies, sketches, and unfinished ideas. Frustrations in the papal court. Pope Leo X respected Leonardo, but their relationship was uneasy. The Pope wanted works quickly finished, paintings to adorn chapels, inventions to serve the papal court. Leonardo, by contrast, worked at the pace of nature itself, layering glazes patiently, revising endlessly, pursuing side experiments that seemed unrelated to commissions. There is a story, perhaps apocryphal, that when Leonardo spent weeks experimenting with varnishes, the Pope sighed, "Alas, this man will never accomplish anything, since he is always thinking of the end before he begins." For Leonardo, the complaint was unfair. He was not idling, but exploring. Yet to the practical eyes of patrons, his slowness was exasperating. The scientist in Rome. Even as commissions faltered, Leonardo poured his energy into scientific pursuits. He studied plants in the Vatican gardens, sketching their forms with precision. He examined optics, testing how light passed through lenses, perhaps imagining instruments that could magnify the world. He returned to anatomy, dissecting animals and seeking permission for human dissections, though such work was often restricted. His notes from this time include remarkable studies of the human heart, in which he traced the spiral motion of blood through its chambers. These observations would not be matched until centuries later. He also turned his attention to geology, pondering the fossils embedded in rocks, the erosion of rivers, the shaping of mountains. To him, the earth itself was alive, its history written in stone. A clash of generations. While Leonardo pursued science, Michelangelo and Raphael dazzled Rome with art. Their names filled the city with admiration, their works visible to all. Leonardo's genius, meanwhile, remained hidden in notebooks, experiments, and half-finished ideas. The contrast must have weighed on him. He was revered as a master, yet sidelined, his slow perfectionism ill-suited to the feverish pace of Rome's commissions. He had once been the rising star of Florence, the pride of Milan, but now he seemed a sage of another age, overshadowed by men younger and more energetic. Still, Leonardo did not yield to bitterness. He walked the streets with dignity, his mind ever open, his curiosity undimmed. He found solace in Melzi's companionship, in quiet study, in the pages of his endless notes. The death of Raphael. In 1520, Raphael died suddenly at the age of 37. Rome mourned deeply, for it had lost its brightest star. Michelangelo continued to labor with fierce devotion, but Leonardo's own path was already turning away from the papal city. His time in Rome had brought more frustration than triumph, more study than recognition. Yet fate was not finished with him. Beyond the Alps in France, a king had heard of his genius and longed to welcome him. Francis I, young and ambitious, saw in Leonardo not merely an artist, but the embodiment of the Renaissance spirit. He would soon invite the master to his court, offering comfort, respect, and freedom in his final years. Leonardo's quiet legacy in Rome. Though Rome gave Leonardo few triumphs, his time there was not wasted. His botanical studies, his anatomical sketches, his reflections on geology and optics, all were fruits of these years. Though unseen by his contemporaries, they would inspire generations to come. Even his apparent failures revealed something profound, that Leonardo was not bound by the demands of patrons or the race for fame. He belonged to a different rhythm, one of inquiry and wonder, where even unfinished thoughts were treasures. A transition toward the end. As Part 9 closes, imagine Leonardo walking through the gardens of the Vatican, sketchbook in hand, his steps slow but steady. Around him rise the triumphs of Michelangelo and Raphael, celebrated by all. Yet Leonardo remains at peace with his path. He looks not at the chapels or frescoes, but at the plants by the fountain, at the way water arcs into the basin, at the play of light on leaves. To him, these small wonders are as profound as any monument. Soon he will leave Rome behind and journey north into France, where the last chapter of his extraordinary life will unfold. The final journey, Arches, France, and the sunset years. The year was 1516. Leonardo da Vinci, now in his mid-60s, had lived through the glories of Florence, the brilliance of Milan, and the frustrations of Rome. His beard flowed long and white, his step had slowed, and his right hand had weakened, perhaps from a stroke. Yet his mind, ever curious, ever restless, remained luminous. At this time, a new chapter opened. Across the Alps, King Francis I of France had risen to power. Young, energetic, and devoted to the Renaissance ideals of art and learning, Francis had long admired Leonardo from afar. To him, Leonardo was not only a painter, but a sage, the living embodiment of genius. And so, he extended an invitation. Come to France, to Amboise, and live under my protection. Leonardo accepted. Perhaps he sensed that his years in Italy had drawn to a close, that his homeland, divided by wars and rivalries, could no longer give him peace. In France, he would find not only patronage, but comfort and respect in the twilight of his life. Crossing the Alps. The journey from Italy to France was long and arduous. Leonardo travelled with his beloved pupil Francesco Melzi, who had become like a son to him, as well as several trusted servants. With him, he carried 3 paintings that never left his side: the Mona Lisa, the Virgin and Child with St. Anne, and St. John the Baptist. These works were not simply commissions, they were part of his soul, his lifelong meditations in paint. They crossed the Alps, winding through steep passes, braving winds and snow. Imagine Leonardo, frail yet determined, wrapped in furs, gazing at the peaks around him. The mountains, carved by time, must have stirred the same wonder he had felt as a boy studying rocks and rivers. Even in old age, nature remained his greatest teacher. The court of Francis VIII. Upon arrival, Leonardo was warmly welcomed by King Francis I. The monarch treated him not as a mere servant or craftsman, but as a friend and counsellor. Leonardo was given the manor house of Clos-Lucé near the royal chateau of Amboise, where he could live comfortably with Melzi and his household. Francis often visited Leonardo, speaking with him for hours. He delighted in the wisdom of the aging master, in his stories of Florence and Milan, in his sketches of machines and cities. Some accounts even suggest that Francis would rest his arm affectionately around Leonardo's shoulders as they walked together through the gardens. For Leonardo, this was a blessing. After years of chasing commissions, facing impatient patrons and enduring rivalries, he had found at last a patron who valued him not for finished works, but for the breadth of his mind. The final notebooks. In France, Leonardo's paintings slowed, but his pen did not. He filled his notebooks with studies of water, mechanics, and geometry. He refined designs for bridges, canals, and fortifications. He recorded reflections on philosophy, on the unity of nature, on the fleetingness of life. He wrote of the moon, considering how its light was reflected from the sun. He pondered the motion of the earth, the erosion of rivers, the patterns of the stars. His thoughts leapt constantly from the smallest details of plants to the vast motions of the heavens. Though his right hand had weakened, he still sketched, guiding the pen with care. And when he could no longer draw as before, he dictated to Melzi, ensuring that his thoughts would not be lost. A master's companions at Clos-Lucé, Leonardo's household was small but devoted. Francesco Melzi remained his constant companion, recording his master's notes, organizing his papers, and caring for him with loyalty. Melzi would later inherit Leonardo's manuscripts, preserving them for future generations. Another assistant, Salai, who had been with Leonardo for many years, was also nearby. Though their relationship had sometimes been difficult, Leonardo had left him gifts and kindness. Together they created a circle of care around the aging master, allowing him to live with dignity in his final years. Reflections on a life. In these sunset years, Leonardo often reflected on the course of his life. He had painted works that changed the course of art, studied anatomy with unmatched precision, designed machines centuries ahead of their time. And yet, he often judged himself harshly. He wrote in his notes, "I have offended God and mankind, because my work did not reach the quality it should have." These words reveal the perfectionism that haunted him always. To the world he was a genius, to himself he was forever unfinished, forever striving. Yet perhaps this very dissatisfaction was the source of his greatness. It kept him curious, kept him reaching, kept him alive to the wonders of the world. The last days. In the spring of 1519, Leonardo's health declined. He grew weaker, confined more often to his chamber at Clos-Lucé. Francis thus continued to visit, offering friendship and respect. Melzi stayed constantly at his side, faithful to the end. On May 2, 1519, Leonardo da Vinci passed away at the age of 67. According to legend, he died in the arms of King Francis I, though historians debate the truth of this tender image. What is certain is that he left this world peacefully, surrounded by those who loved him. He was buried in the chapel of Saint-Florentin at Amboise, though the tomb was later lost. Still his presence lingers in the valley of the Loire, in the stones of Clos-Lucé, in the memory of France. The enduring light. As part 10 closes, picture Leonardo in his final days. The gardens of Clos-Lucé in bloom, the river Loire winding nearby, the King of France walking with him under the trees. In his hands, the notebooks of a lifetime. On his easel, the smile of the Mona Lisa, never surrendered. He had lived as few ever live: painter, scientist, engineer, philosopher, dreamer. He had left behind not only works of art, but also a vision of the unity of knowledge, the harmony of the world. Though his body lay still, his spirit continued to move through time, inspiring generations yet unborn. The boy from Vinci had become eternal, after the master. The first legacy, Leonardo da Vinci, passed from this world on May 2, 1519. The manor house of Clos-Lucé fell quiet, its rooms still holding the scent of oils, the rustle of sketches, the presence of an old man whose mind had stretched across the heavens. But though his body was gone, his influence had only begun to unfold. The loyal disciple, Francesco Melzi, at his side to the end, was Francesco Melzi, the devoted pupil who had followed him from Italy to France. To Melzi, Leonardo was more than a teacher. He was a second father, a guide, and a light. Leonardo entrusted Melzi with his notebooks, his manuscripts, and his scientific writings, an inheritance not of gold, but of thought. Melzi worked tirelessly to preserve this treasure. He organized the pages, copied passages, and guarded them from neglect. Without Melzi's devotion, much of what we know of Leonardo's scientific mind might have been lost forever. And yet even Melzi could not prevent the scattering of these precious volumes. Over the years, many of Leonardo's manuscripts slipped away into private hands, sold, gifted, or misplaced. Today they are spread across the world, in London, Paris, Milan, Madrid, and elsewhere, each one a fragment of the master's mind. Salai and the inheritance of art. Another figure at Leonardo's side was Gian Giacomo Caprotti, better known as Salai, who had entered Leonardo's service as a mischievous boy and remained with him for decades. Their relationship was often turbulent, marked by affection and frustration, but Salai had been part of Leonardo's household longer than anyone. In Leonardo's will, Salai received several works, including the Mona Lisa. For a time, the painting remained in his possession before eventually passing into the French royal collection. Thus, through this chain of inheritance, the most famous portrait in the world found its way to France, where it would later reside in the Louvre. The students of genius Leonardo's circle of pupils, Salai, Melzi, Cesare da Sesto, Giovanni Antonio Boltraffio, and others, carried fragments of his style into their own works. They painted Madonnas with gentle sfumato, portraits with subtle smiles, scenes suffused with atmospheric depth, yet none could equal the master. His genius was not only in technique but in vision, in the restless curiosity that united art, science, and invention. Still, their works helped spread his influence across Italy and beyond, ensuring that his name did not fade with his passing. Contemporaries and rivals. For his contemporaries, Leonardo's death marked the loss of a unique figure. Michelangelo continued his labors in Rome, carving, painting, and designing, until his own death decades later. Raphael, already gone by 1520, had left behind frescoes that defined the grace of the Renaissance. Compared to these giants, Leonardo's visible legacy seemed smaller, for he left fewer completed works. Many commissions were abandoned, many projects remained unfinished. Some in his own time wondered whether he had squandered his gifts in endless experiments. Yet others understood that Leonardo's true contribution was not in the quantity of finished works, but in the depth of his vision. He had changed the way artists thought about nature, light, and the human form. He had expanded the very meaning of what an artist could be. The notebooks in silence. In the years immediately after his death, Leonardo's notebooks remained largely unknown to the wider world. They were treasures hidden in trunks consulted by a few, admired in whispers. The full breadth of his scientific imagination would not be revealed until centuries later, when these manuscripts were rediscovered, studied, and published. Had they been printed in his own time, they might have transformed science. They contained insights into anatomy, engineering, optics, geology, and mechanics that would not reappear until the 17th and 18th centuries. But the Renaissance was not ready. The printing press had spread books, but Leonardo's pages, written in mirror script and filled with sketches, seemed more like private journals than treatises. And so, for a time, his genius remained partly veiled. The king's memory. King Francis I, who had cherished Leonardo in his final years, mourned the master deeply. He spoke of him with reverence, calling him the greatest mind of his age. Legends grew that Francis had cradled Leonardo as he died, a story perhaps more poetic than true, yet one that captures the bond between king and sage. In France, Leonardo's reputation lived on in courtly circles, as the memory of a wise elder whose conversation was as valuable as his art. His presence elevated the prestige of the French court, and his works, carried into the royal collection, became treasures of the nation. The first echoes of legacy. In the decades after his passing, Leonardo's reputation grew not only as a painter, but as a figure of legend. Stories circulated of his inventions, his dissections, his endless curiosity. Writers spoke of him as a man who embodied the Renaissance itself, who seemed to belong not to one field, but to all. Artists studied his surviving works, marveling at the softness of the Mona Lisa, the drama of the Last Supper, the tenderness of the Virgin and Child with St. Anne. Even unfinished works, like the Adoration of the Magi, became sources of inspiration, studied for their dynamism and design. The quiet immortality. Though Leonardo had often judged himself harshly, believing he had left too little, the seeds he planted began to sprout. His students carried his style, his patrons remembered his wisdom, and his notebooks, though scattered, would one day astonish the world. In this first stage of legacy, Leonardo was remembered not only as a painter, but as a man of wonder, a figure who seemed larger than life, whose presence lingered even after death. A legacy waiting to be unfolded. As Part 11 closes, picture the manner of Clos Lucé after Leonardo's death. The rooms are quiet, but his spirit lingers in the sketches left on the tables, the unfinished projects in the corners, the manuscripts bundled with care. Melzi guards them faithfully. Salai carries away the Mona Lisa. Francis. I remembers his conversations. It is the silence after a great storm of thought, the pause before history begins to understand what it has lost and what it has gained. The echoes of centuries, Leonardo's growing legend. When Leonardo da Vinci passed away in 1519, the world did not yet grasp the full scope of what it had lost. His paintings were admired, his presence remembered, but much of his genius lay hidden in manuscripts and unfinished projects. It would take decades, even centuries, for his reputation to grow into the towering figure we recognize today. The paintings that endured. In the immediate years after his death, only a handful of Leonardo's paintings were widely known. The Mona Lisa, still in France, began its slow ascent into legend, cherished by the French kings. The Last Supper, though already fading due to Leonardo's experimental technique, continued to inspire awe in Milan. Artists studied his works carefully. They marveled at his handling of light, the softness of his sfumato, the lifelike grace of his figures. His influence seeped into the art of northern Italy and France, passed on through his students and imitators. Yet Leonardo left fewer than 20 completed paintings. Compared to Michelangelo's statues or Raphael's frescoes, his visible legacy seemed small, and so for much of the 16th century, his reputation rested more on memory and anecdote than on the number of works in churches or palaces. Vasari and the First Biography. In 1550, nearly 30 years after Leonardo's death, the Florentine writer Giorgio Vasari published lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects. In it, he dedicated a chapter to Leonardo, praising him as a man of extraordinary gifts. Vasari told stories of Leonardo's charm, his beauty, his brilliance in every field. He described how Leonardo had outshone Verrocchio, how he had designed marvelous machines, how he had lived with elegance and wit. Some tales were embellished, others perhaps apocryphal, but together they shaped the first image of Leonardo as more than an artist, as a universal genius. Vasari also lamented that Leonardo had left so many works unfinished, suggesting that his vast curiosity had been both his glory and his weakness. This paradox of brilliance unmatched and projects incomplete would remain central to the way the world remembered him. The dispersal of the notebooks. Meanwhile, Leonardo's manuscripts began to scatter. Melzi had tried to preserve them, but after his own death, they were dispersed among collectors. Some were bound into volumes, others lost or hidden. A few surfaced in Spain, where King Philip II acquired them. Others remained in Italy, in the libraries of nobles. Centuries later, they would appear in places as far apart as Paris, London, and even private English estates. Each discovery revealed another facet of Leonardo's mind, his sketches of machines, his studies of anatomy, his reflections on water and motion. For the scholars who eventually examined them, these notebooks were revelations. They showed a man centuries ahead of his time, imagining helicopters, tanks, submarines, and scientific principles unknown to his age. The myth of the universal genius. As Europe entered the 17th and 18th centuries, Leonardo's reputation grew steadily. He became the symbol of the Renaissance man, one who sought to master every discipline, to unite art and science into a single vision. Writers and thinkers invoked his name as an example of boundless human potential. Painters studied his techniques, scientists admired his observations, engineers marveled at his inventions. Even when they did not fully understand his notes, they recognized the scale of his ambition. This myth was not entirely accurate, for Leonardo was also human, flawed, and often incomplete. But myths served to inspire, and Leonardo's myth became one of humanity's most powerful. The idea that one person could embrace all knowledge, that curiosity itself could be a way of life. The Enlightenment and rediscovery. During the Enlightenment, when Europe rediscovered the value of science and reason, Leonardo's reputation rose even higher. Scholars examined his scientific writings, marveling at his insights into anatomy, optics, and mechanics. Engineers noted how his designs anticipated modern inventions. Natural philosophers admired how he had seen patterns uniting the human body and the natural world. Artists continued to admire the subtlety of his painting, the depth of the Mona Lisa's smile, the drama of the Last Supper. By the 18th century, Leonardo was no longer remembered only as a painter, but as a prophet of science. The Romantic Leonardo. In the 19th century, during the age of Romanticism, Leonardo's image shifted again. Writers and artists saw in him the figure of the tragic genius, brilliant, visionary, but always unsatisfied, always leaving works unfinished. They admired his notebooks as the dreams of a restless soul, a man ahead of his time, but burdened by the limitations of his age. The Mona Lisa, moved to the Louvre after the French Revolution, became a magnet for visitors who sensed in her enigmatic smile the mystery of Leonardo himself. Poets and novelists wrote of her as a symbol of eternal beauty and secrecy. Leonardo became, in the Romantic imagination, not only a genius, but also a mystery, a man whose inner life was as fascinating as his works. The theft of the Mona Lisa. In 1911, Leonardo's reputation leapt into the modern era through an act of theft. A worker at the Louvre stole the Mona Lisa and hid it for 2 years. Newspapers around the world blazed with the story. Suddenly, millions who had never heard of Leonardo knew his name. When the painting was recovered, safe and unharmed, its fame was sealed forever. No longer was it just a masterpiece of the Renaissance. It was the most famous painting in the world, and with it, Leonardo became a household name, the universal symbol of artistic genius. A legacy that grew with time. Thus, over the centuries, Leonardo's reputation expanded far beyond what he could have imagined. From a painter with relatively few completed works, he became the archetype of the Renaissance man, the embodiment of curiosity, imagination, and human potential. Each age found in him what it sought. The Renaissance saw a brilliant artist, the Enlightenment a scientist, the Romantics a visionary, the modern world a cultural icon. And through it all, his works and notebooks whispered of a mind that had tried to hold the universe within its gaze. The growing echo. As part 12 closes, imagine the centuries passing like waves. From the quiet rooms of Clos Lucé to the grand halls of the Louvre, from scattered notebooks to modern laboratories, Leonardo's presence grows louder. His art, his science, his myth all intertwine until his name becomes more than history. He is no longer just a man of the 15th century. He is a symbol of possibility itself. The rediscovery Leonardo in the modern age. Centuries passed after Leonardo's death, and his name grew steadily brighter. His paintings inspired awe, his myth fascinated poets and scholars, but the full scope of his genius remained hidden. For while the world admired the Mona Lisa and the Last Supper, Leonardo's notebooks, those vast archives of sketches and reflections, lay scattered, waiting to be rediscovered. The sleeping manuscripts. After Francesco Melzi's death in 1570, many of Leonardo's manuscripts slipped from careful hands into a long period of neglect. Some were sold, some given away, others lost. A few survived in the libraries of collectors, but most of the world forgot they existed. Then, piece by piece, they began to emerge. In Madrid, in the Royal Library, manuscripts long forgotten were rediscovered in the 1960s, filled with sketches of machines and studies of mechanics. In Milan, the Codex Atlanticus, a massive collection of his writings, came to light. In England, the Codex Arundel entered the British Library, while the Codex Leicester, a manuscript devoted to water, astronomy, and geology, eventually found its way into private collections, even purchased in the modern era by Bill Gates. Every discovery was like opening a window into Leonardo's mind. The pages revealed designs for helicopters, submarines, tanks, hydraulic pumps, musical instruments, and studies of anatomy that rival modern science. Each codex showed not only what Leonardo had achieved, but what he had dreamed. Leonardo the scientist. As scholars studied these manuscripts, a new image of Leonardo emerged, not only as an artist, but as a scientist centuries ahead of his time. He had dissected the human body with precision unmatched until the 19th century. He had drawn the heart's chambers, the embryo in the womb, the curvature of the spine, the muscles of the face. His notes on optics anticipated modern theories of light and vision. His studies of water anticipated hydrodynamics. His designs for flying machines anticipated aeronautics. Leonardo had no laboratories, no modern instruments, and no colleagues in science. Yet through observation and imagination, he glimpsed truths that later generations would prove with technology. The modern world, hungry for heroes of reason and creativity, embraced this image of Leonardo as the first modern scientist, a man of the Renaissance who looked far beyond his time. The artist reaffirmed. Yet as his scientific fame grew, his reputation as an artist only deepened. The Mona Lisa became the most visited, most written about, and most reproduced painting in history. Scholars debated her smile, her identity, the techniques of her creation. The painting became a cultural icon, appearing in films, poems, advertisements, even parodies. The Last Supper, though damaged, remained a pilgrimage site. Restorations attempted to preserve its fading glory, and visitors from around the world traveled to Milan to see it. Its composition, the disciples reacting to Christ's words, the balance of drama and stillness, influenced countless painters and filmmakers. Each brushstroke of Leonardo's few surviving works was studied with reverence. Though he left fewer paintings than many of his contemporaries, each was treated as a jewel, a treasure of immeasurable worth. The 20th century fascination. The 20th century brought Leonardo into popular culture as never before. Books, exhibitions, and documentaries presented him as the ultimate genius, a figure who united art, science, and philosophy. Writers compared him to modern inventors and visionaries. Engineers marveled at how his sketches anticipated helicopters and tanks. Psychologists studied his notebooks to understand his thought process. Historians debated whether his perfectionism, his habit of leaving works unfinished, was a flaw or the natural result of a mind too vast for one lifetime. In 1952, the 500th anniversary of his birth was celebrated worldwide, with exhibitions and tributes in Italy, France, and beyond. Scholars and the public alike rediscovered not only the beauty of his art, but also the depth of his science. The Codex Leicester and global fame. In 1994, Leonardo's Codex Leicester was purchased by Bill Gates for over $30 million, making headlines around the globe. Pages from the Codex were digitized and displayed as screensavers on millions of computers, bringing Leonardo's handwriting and sketches into modern homes. For many, this was the first time they saw Leonardo not as a distant Renaissance painter, but as a thinker whose words and drawings still felt alive, still sparked wonder in the electronic age. The symbol of the Renaissance man. By the late 20th century, Leonardo had become more than a historical figure. He was a symbol of curiosity without limits, of creativity unbound by disciplines, of the unity of art and science. Educators invoked him as the model of interdisciplinary learning. Artists saw in him the roots of modern realism and expression. Engineers and scientists claimed him as one of their own. Even popular culture embraced him, appearing in novels, films, and even children's cartoons. In every field, his name was shorthand for genius. The enduring mystery. Yet despite all this fame, Leonardo remained mysterious. His notebooks reveal much, but also leave questions unanswered. Why did he leave so many works unfinished? Did he ever test his flying machines? What did he truly believe about God, nature, and humanity? The Mona Lisa, the most studied painting in the world, still refuses to give up her secret. Her smile remains as ambiguous as when Leonardo first laid down his brush. In her silence, she seems to mirror Leonardo himself, a man who revealed so much, yet always left something hidden. A modern presence. As part 13 closes, imagine a modern museum gallery, bright lights, glass cases, visitors gathered around a codex, marveling at sketches of gears and wings drawn 500 years ago. On the wall hangs a reproduction of the Mona Lisa, her smile unchanged, still capturing hearts. Leonardo's presence is not confined to history books. He is here, alive in the admiration of millions, in the inspiration of scientists, artists, and dreamers. His notebooks, once scattered and forgotten, now speak again, their ink carrying his restless mind into the 21st century. He has crossed centuries not as a relic, but as a companion. Leonardo's modern influence, science, art, and technology. As the modern world unfolded, Leonardo da Vinci's presence grew ever stronger. He was no longer just a Renaissance painter, nor only a scientist ahead of his time. He became something larger, a universal symbol of human potential, invoked by artists, engineers, educators, and dreamers alike. His legacy flowed into the very fabric of modern science and art, guiding minds centuries after his own hand had stilled. Leonardo and modern scientists of the 19th and 20th centuries looked back at Leonardo's notebooks with astonishment. His studies of anatomy, preserved in delicate pen and ink drawings, revealed knowledge that medical science had only recently confirmed. His dissections of the heart anticipated the discovery of how blood swirls through the ventricles. His drawings of embryos captured details unseen until the invention of the microscope. In physics and mechanics, he recorded observations about friction, motion, and the flow of fluids that paralleled discoveries made centuries later. Hydrodynamic engineers studied his sketches of whirlpools and currents, recognizing patterns that echoed their own mathematical models. Aeronautical pioneers marveled at his flying machines, not because they worked, but because he had grasped the principles of lift, drag, and balance long before aviation was possible. Though Leonardo's findings were not published in his lifetime, they remind modern scientists of the power of observation, of watching nature carefully and drawing conclusions with patient curiosity. In him, they see not only a visionary, but also the very essence of scientific inquiry. Influence on modern art artists, too, continue to walk in Leonardo's shadow. His use of sfumato and chiaroscuro, the blending of tones, the play of light and shadow, laid the groundwork for centuries of painting. His insistence that art must imitate nature inspired the realism of later masters. His psychological portraits, like the Mona Lisa, prefigured modern explorations of human emotion in art. In the 19th and 20th centuries, artists such as Delacroix, Ingres, and the pre-Raphaelites studied his works, seeking to recapture his balance of beauty and mystery. Modern surrealists, intrigued by his grotesque sketches and fantastical inventions, claimed him as a precursor to their explorations of the subconscious. And beyond technique, Leonardo's life itself became a model. Artists saw in him the archetype of the creator who refuses boundaries, who wanders between disciplines, who sees painting not as craft alone, but as philosophy, technology, and innovation. In the modern age of machines, Leonardo's inventions found new audiences. Engineers studying his notebooks recognized designs that foreshadowed helicopters, submarines, tanks, and bicycles. Museums began building replicas of his machines, bringing to life wooden models of gears, pulleys, and wings based on his sketches. While many of his inventions would not have worked as drawn, their spirit of innovation inspired generations. To engineers, Leonardo became the patron of invention itself, the dreamer who imagined possibilities before their time. The age of computers and space exploration embraced him as well. Innovators compared his imagination to their own quests to push boundaries. For every new technology, from artificial intelligence to robotics, someone could find an echo in Leonardo's notebooks. A sketch of gears, a design for a mechanical knight, a reflection on the patterns of the universe. Education and the ideal of the polymath. Perhaps nowhere has Leonardo's influence been greater than in education. Schools and universities invoke him as the model of interdisciplinary learning, a man who did not separate art from science, but saw them as partners. In an age where specialization often divides disciplines, Leonardo reminds us that curiosity is one whole, that the painter can also be an engineer, the anatomist also a philosopher. Programs in STEAM education, science, technology, engineering, art, and mathematics often hold him up as the original example of how creativity and knowledge thrive together. The Mona Lisa in the modern world. The Mona Lisa has become more than a painting. It is a cultural phenomenon. Millions line up each year in the Louvre to see her behind glass, a small frame surrounded by a sea of cameras. She appears in advertisements, political cartoons and films. Andy Warhol transformed her into pop art. Marcel Duchamp gave her a moustache in parody, and yet, through it all, her mysterious smile endures. Why does she still hold us? Perhaps because she embodies what Leonardo himself embodied: ambiguity, depth, a sense of endless possibility. Just as Leonardo left works unfinished, the Mona Lisa leaves interpretation unfinished, always inviting us to wonder. The Last Supper. Preserved in Milan, the Last Supper, fragile and faded, remains another center of Leonardo's legacy. Restorers have worked for centuries to preserve it, stripping away layers of damage to reveal fragments of the original vision. Despite its fragility, the mural continues to move those who see it. Its composition, the drama of gestures, the quiet dignity of Christ. These elements inspired not only painters, but also filmmakers, photographers, and storytellers across the modern world. The scene remains one of the most reproduced images in Christian art, its influence woven into culture far beyond its convent wall. The symbol of human potential. Above all, Leonardo has become a symbol of what humans can achieve. To artists, he shows that beauty can capture the soul. To scientists, he proves that observation can unlock the universe. To inventors, he demonstrates that imagination can leap ahead of its time. In an era of technology and rapid change, his example resonates more than ever. He reminds us that knowledge is not a set of separate boxes, but a web of connections. That curiosity can be endless. That life is richer when art and science walk hand in hand. A light for the future. As our story comes to an end, imagine the modern world illuminated by screens, filled with airplanes, skyscrapers, satellites, and digital art. And in the midst of it all, the presence of Leonardo remains, his notebooks studied in laboratories, his paintings visited by millions, his name invoked whenever we speak of genius. The boy from Vinci who once sketched in the fields of Tuscany now speaks to astronauts, engineers, painters, and children. His voice is not confined to the past. It whispers still, telling us to look closer, to ask questions, to wonder without end. Good night.